So first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are really glad to present our recently finalized ESPON project. Actually, we are still waiting for some feedback on the final report, so it's not 100% finalized yet, but it's will be soon available. The final reports and all the scientific reports will be available. The ESPON actually, it's not changing. Actually, it's not directly related to the topic of this workshop, this event. There is on landscape transition. Although by what we tackle on the project, we tackle resilience, we are talking about hazards. Even though we do not work on forest fires, we work on the relation of these disasters with the disaster risk management and policy, territorial policy and spatial planning. So I think that many things that we'll present here may be very useful for you. Here I have included a word cloud just for you to see the main topics that we treat in this ESPON project that I'm sure that will be transversal in the work that you do, such as spatial planning, measurements, vulnerability, the territory, of course, natural disasters, and the disaster risk management, economic impacts, etc. I have included this target in the top right of the slides to the ones that I think would be more interesting and more aligned with what I think you need here. Although I'm presenting everything very fast, actually, but I'm presenting everything that we did in the project, not only the scientific findings, but also the recommendations, the final recommendations, so that some parts of the presentation will be done really fast. But as you know, the documents will be available, the presentation as well, and for anything that you need, just ask us for clarification, and the methodological and interpretation of the results are all available. Okay, just to start with the framework, our consortium is formed by 5 partners. Technalia is leading the project, and we also count on the expertise of Geological Survey from Finland, Technical University of Dortmund in Germany, Trinomics in the Netherlands, and Cambridge Econometrics in the UK, each one with their own expertise. We join efforts to answer to some research questions, and that in summary are identifying territorial patterns in terms of natural hazards, of economic impacts, the consequent economic impacts, and to identify the vulnerable areas, as well as what are the instruments and policies behind them, disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, and how they are integrated to the spatial planning. So before we continue, I just wanted to make an appointment here and punctualize something here. On the term natural disaster, it's not longer used. Actually, on the scientific community, it's not a correct term. We don't use natural disaster because in the scientific community, it is considered that disaster can never be natural. What is natural are the hazards. And the hazards, depending on the vulnerability of the territory, can cause disasters. So we would actually, the title of the project is on natural disasters, but we just wanted to say here that you will hear us talking about natural hazard, either natural hazard or disasters. Okay, just the rationale behind the project. We have analyzed 4+1 natural hazards that are river floods, windstorms, earthquakes, and droughts. And the landslides, even though it's coherent, it's much more coherent to analyze at regional level, since one of our case studies had this as the biggest challenge. and we had data European-wide, so we have decided to include the distribution of the landslide as well to our project. How are the project organized? There is a first block where we have gathered data and distributed them spatially, all these natural hazards that I have mentioned, as well as the consequent economic impacts. Not only direct, but also indirect. And it's worth mentioning that indirect impact it's very complex to get. So we did it through some modeling, and at European level, it's innovative, I would say. We did that. We applied this modeling at two scales. One of them is the European scale, and we have applied them also to two test regions in our project. Then we have analyzed these territorial patterns and interpreted them with the support of the vulnerability, the vulnerability assessment that helps us to understand these patterns. In parallel, we have done an exhaustive analysis of the disaster risk management and climate change adaptation policies, existing policies, and how they are integrated into spatial planning. We have gathered some good practices, and we have supported the general findings by bringing the regional perspective through and local to 8 case studies. Here is important to say that territorial planning regarding natural hazards and economic impacts, how we may minimize them or decrease them by actions focused on decreasing exposure of these natural hazards, decreasing the sensitivity, or increasing the increasing the coping capacity. And to do so, it's very important that we know the vulnerability of the territory. And that's why we included this to the study. It's kind of an added value to ESPON Titan. And you will see in a while what we did in this term. Regarding the conceptual framework, all the elements that we have included here, they have their own definitions, but they have been interpreted in different ways. Sometimes it's kind of confusing, so we felt the need to present it here and to make it clear how we understand them, how we understand their relation, and what are the elements that we really present as a result of our Titan project. So in this case, we have analyzed the hazards on the one hand. On the other hand, we analyzed the economic impact in terms of damage and losses. And here we understand the risk as a combination of hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. And the vulnerability is a determinant factor to understand these consequences, and that is formed by sensitivity and the coping capacity. All this will be detailed a little bit further, but we have based this scheme into not only the disaster risk management approach, but also the climate change adaptation approach from the IPCC assessment report. And there are some references here from another ESPON project that is called ESPON Climate. We have kind of updated methodology used there. We have included as well some references of an article and another project that have represented spatially the European climate risk typology. Just to say that, as Tom had mentioned, the slides will be available and these information are included there. So, and otherwise you can contact for anything that you need, any concern or anything. Now let's go into the scientific findings. Regarding natural hazard patterns, as mentioned, we have analyzed the distribution of these 5 hazards. And as you see, they have very different distribution. We have analyzed them individually and have analyzed the distribution and interpreted the distribution of them individually. And it's not, I'm not going deep into them, but you can find it in our documentation. And as you see, only the drought were not available at NUTS 3 level. It was at NUTS 0, it's country level. So it's almost this challenge on data gathering. We have used publicly available data, mainly data from JRC, from the Risk Data Hub, and the Copernicus, and other database that had available data for the whole Europe. After having them individually, we have created an aggregated map, and for that we had to distribute them in the territory proportionally. In other exercises I have seen, actually in ESPON Climate, it was used the Delphi method with expert analysis to determine this proportion, to distribute the hazards into the territory. In our case, we have decided, and it's all justified as well, to use the cumulative damage cost. So we have a proportion of each of the analyzed hazard, and then we could make this distribution. I'm not, again, going into deep analysis of this. If you want, we can talk about it later, because I have many things to present. But just to mention that the aggregated map does not respect the flood protection measures, actually any of the hazard protection measures, so that when we consider risk, one region, another region that may be painted in the same color may not have the same risk behind, because we do not consider the measure behind each hazard. As mentioned, the drought potential is displayed in at 0, so we have some issues with the national borders there. And to mention that human fatalities and other damage that were not counted as monetary value are not included in this distribution. Okay, economic impacts analysis. We have done an analysis for the direct ones, that is induced by direct damage to the capital stock, and indirect one that is induced by the disruption of economic activity in other regions, other neighbor regions, well, not only neighbors, but linked regions, somehow linked. And how did we do that? First of all, we did an analysis of impact pathways to get these qualitative analysis on what are the direct and indirect impacts that may be related to each of the hazards. And then we have got the data, the specific data on damage costs, and distributed them per NUTS 3 region, as well as per 5 capital stocks. And with that, we created the damage distribution matrix that represented the direct economic impacts, and that were inputs for the model, that is the multi-regional input-output model, that with the result of this modeling, we were able to identify the indirect economic impacts. Again, we have used publicly available data sources, and mainly from JRC, Risk Data Hub, the EMDAT, and the WISP database. We have analyzed not only the spatial distribution, but also the yearly distribution of these aggregated hazards, because we wanted to know the share of direct and indirect. And it was very interesting that one of the conclusions that we found, that they are not that different. Actually, it's on the proportion of 60-40%, 60% in the direct to 40% indirect. You can see by the numbers there on the period analyzed, that is from 1995 to 2017. It's important to say the indirect impact in this model does not account for interruptions of critical infrastructure. If we count that a disaster may interrupt an important transnational European, I don't know, network, it may be even higher. The indirect impact may be even higher than that. On the right side, we have analyzed the same data, but this time distributed by natural hazard. So we see that in general, floods and windstorm winds, it's about 50% of the hazard, aggregated hazard related to a flood, and around 30% related to windstorm. It's curious to see, well, it's expected actually, that earthquakes that is represented in orange there is not very common. It's more less frequent, but when it happens, it has a huge impact, as we can see there. Okay, this is the spatial distribution, the same way that we did for the natural hazards, we did for the economic impacts. We have the 4 hazards analyzed individually. They have different spatial distributions for each hazard, and they are analyzed separately, but as well, they are represented in an aggregated form. So the maps represents the negative change of economic output to GVA ratio in the same region. So in this case, as dark as the region is painted, the highest is the economic impact. Here we have some interpretation of the areas. Just by giving a look on the map, we can see where are the most highlighted economic impacts. I'm not going to deep into it at this moment. And just as a general conclusion, having this information on the hazard and on the economic impact, not only direct but indirect as well, is a powerful tool to estimate the future potential economic damage caused by them, and at net-tree level and other levels as well, of course. We have kind of compared and used other exercises and reports, and we see that our results are aligned to them and coherent to other studies. And just to make it clear here that the human loss is not counted in this economic loss. They are not monetized, and this monetization of the human life, I don't think if it's ethical to do, but I know that there are studies that do so. It's outside of the scope of this project. It's kind of a very much complex issue that we should consider that are not included here. Okay, and as a result, we also have compared our results from economic impacts, natural hazards, and vulnerability, and we consider it's very important to know what's happening on those behind each of those elements to support and to better manage the risks.
Carolina, I'm
yes.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
Time flies, and according to the agenda, you still have like 5 minutes before, actually.
I have 10 minutes, right? Okay, but I'll be fast. I'll try to.
Because there will be still there needs to be time for questions.
Okay, I'll try to speed up. We have done the local analysis as mentioned in 2 areas, the Prague and Charente Maritime. And in one of them, we see how the measures have decreased the budget used for this instead of recovering using the budget to management of this risk. In Charente Maritime, we found that they would need to better consider the climate change projections because the measure was based on past flooding instead of projections of the flooding. The vulnerability assessment, vulnerability matters. That is our conclusion. And in this case, you can see by the graph on the right that we understand vulnerability as the combination of susceptibility and coping capacity. And this is, as we said, is where we can adjust the measures in order to decrease the impacts of the natural hazards. It's true. The knowledge, knowing the vulnerability of the territory is the way that we can work on the planning on the policies to minimize those effects. We have used 25 indicators and combined them to analyze this vulnerability. We have analyzed also the population living in high and very high vulnerability territories that in Europe counts for 22% of the population. And this is the interpretation of the map. Again, by looking at the map, we see that the eastern and the southern countries are the most vulnerable. They have either or both high susceptibility or low coping capacity. And this methodology that we have, well, the high susceptibility is on the early levers and employment, risk, poverty, social exclusion, more related to this. And the reducing capacity is more on the GDP, employment, gender equality, research and development expenditure, etc. This methodology is aligned. We have tried to align as much as possible to the JRC methodology that is ongoing in terms of vulnerability analysis. And of course, this methodology can still be improved, but with the information that we have, with the time and with the scope and the scale and the budget, that's what we did. And it's enough for this project and to know how is the distribution and the relation to the natural hazard and economic impacts. So conclusions, territorial planning has a key role in their disaster risk management, and knowledge of territorial vulnerability is crucial for proper disaster risk management. It's interesting to say that vulnerability reduction could be an efficient way to reduce impacts of potential disaster, as I have mentioned. The policy instruments, we have done, I'm going to the next one, we have done an analysis country by country and per disaster on DRM and on disaster risk management and climate change adaptation practices. And we have done another exercise on by country as well on what is the role of spatial planning and the relation to those policies. And the conclusions, I'm not going through it because it's included in the policy recommendations that I present. We have worked with 8 case studies that are here presented in the right, that is evenly distributed, have heterogeneous administrative scope, and yes, we try to make them as different as possible so that we could have reference from different solutions. And the lessons learned at local and regional level, I think may be very interesting for you to know that risk prevention activities is, we should focus more on risk prevention than response and reaction. The cost, it's a relevant cost, but it's worth it. These are conclusions from case studies. The risk cannot be avoided nor be reduced to zero, but it can be managed, better or worse, but it can be managed. Mitigation prevention processes that include a whole toolbox of measures, and we have to take advantage of the existing of them. Well, the new methodologies and all the other good practices and lessons learned are mainly focused on collaboration and coordination between different administration and different sectors. So this, they consider, our case studies consider that is a challenge that is not yet resolved in an optimal way, but it's key to make this work well. And this is the same. And the policy recommendations, we have distributed them in 6 blocks. And each of these blocks, we have included some set of policy recommendation. If each of them is included in our report with specific action that should be done to overcome the challenges, and they are mainly focused on economic costs and impacts, the data availability, that is an issue in our projects usually, measurement of economic losses, the funding mechanisms, the cooperation coordination, and the integration of DRM. And together with this policy recommendation that were done more focused on European actions, we have included the lessons learned and good practice from case studies that may also be interesting. These are the future research that we considered is more on methodological issues that I'm jumping because I wanted to go briefly. It's 2 slides, Tom. I'm almost finishing. Go briefly on what we are doing with Portugal. And we consider that the inputs that we got from this project is they are very good information needed for supporting policies and disaster risk management, and the integration of them, the management and the climate change adaptation into spatial planning. And knowing the vulnerability of the territory can be very interesting to work this issue in the to how to integrate this into the spatial planning. So in this case, we can have specific actions. And in this case, we are having a spin-off with Portugal. The goal here have changed a little bit, but even though we're still working with wildfires, that is not a disaster considered in Titan, but all what is behind it, it's the same. So it's just like how to include it into the planning and the policies. And we have done already a diagnosis, and we are in the stage of identification of key challenges and development of the concept, to later on define a strategic planning framework, considering suggestions and recommendations from different perspectives in terms of financial instruments and business model. So this project is planned to start to finish in September, and we are just discussing the how to give the next step. The next step will probably, well, certainly I would say, be a workshop that most of you and the opponents here will be invited to participate. We arranged it with Ana and the Portuguese team. Will be based on the program of Reordenamento e Gestão da Paisagem in Serras, and this specific plan and specific program, but it's replicable and upscaled to other areas as well. And we are discussing the format and the date of the workshop. You'll soon be invited and hear more from us and from the Portuguese team. Thank you for that. Sorry for going over the time. Here is our contact. A friend is connected as well. And for anything that you need, I know that there are many questions there I could not read. I'll do it now. Thank you.